Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Create an Award-Winning Campaign. My name is Jake O'Neill, I'm with Vuelio, and today we're going to be having a discussion with Michael Webb. But first, just to let you know, you can join the conversation on social media, on Twitter at Vuelio, on Facebook at Vuelio. You can email us, use the hashtag Vuelio and we will see it. You can also ask questions in the bottom left-hand corner of the chat box. You type them and we will present your questions. And if we don't have time to get through them all today, we will follow up with a blog post. But enough about me. Let me introduce you to our guest speaker, Michael Webb. Michael is going to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Michael Webb, and I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Battersea. I've been at Battersea Dogs Cats Home now for almost 4 years. Like the vast majority of people, it seems, in public affairs, I was a researcher in Parliament originally, and spent 5 years lobbying in the logistics sector before finding my way into animal welfare. It's a wonderful place to work. We look after around 9,000 dogs and cats a year, and one of our particularly beautiful little kittens you can see climbing on me in the picture on the slide now. My role is specifically to lead the team that has a sort of dual function. In the first instance, we look after public affairs, so trying to shape the legislative agenda around animal welfare. We also look after policy within the home, so my team researches and evaluates a bit of what Battersea thinks on issues of public policy.
Thank you very much. And today we're going to be talking about a very particular campaign which recently won an award. And this is a front page from the Metro. This is kind of where it all started publicly, but obviously it goes back quite some time before that with preparation.
Yeah, for us, although this was the front page of the Metro on the day that we launched the campaign on the 20th of February, for us it had been a huge bit of work for a number of months before then. The call for 5-year sentencing is a long-standing position that Battersea has held, as have many other organisations within our sector. And we felt, as we see incidences of animal cruelty or the consequences of that come into our centres, as we know many others do, we felt it was high time to tackle this legal disparity that sees the maximum sentences for animal cruelty punished so lightly. We started working on the campaign really about a year before this went live. The Environment Committee decided to do a 10-year review of the Animal Welfare Act, which took much of 2016, and we gave evidence to that, and this was one of the points that we made to them that they should back a call for 5-year sentencing. We did had a lot of conversations with MPs that we felt might be supportive, and then we found a couple, particularly a Labour MP called Anna Turley, who had seen a particularly nasty incident, which is referenced in our reports, in her constituency, and she had been calling for this particular change to happen and was piloting a private member's bill through Parliament. So we worked quite a bit with Anna to try and start our campaign in such a way that it provided support to her bill. Now, after months of research, report writing, fact-checking, finding case studies, and working on the digital side of the campaign, it was a wonderful, if tiring, experience to see it finally go live. And I think the first we knew that we might genuinely be able to get somewhere with this was when this was just one example of a serious amount of media coverage we got for the launch of the campaign, and we feel we've been looking to maximise on this really ever since.
And so you'll talk to all the MPs first. You know, you did all your research before you launched, and then you launched. And I know we've spoken before, but there's kind of stages to a launch of a campaign like this, and the slide we've got now is maybe a second stage. Yeah, it is. We've had to be relatively fleet of foot with that through the course of the year, because there are certain milestones, certain sort of lines in the sand that we've had to work around. And the first one of these was we liked the strapline that's used on here, that's used on this advert, which was part of the second phase of our campaign when we really pushed it out to the public online.
However, we didn't feel it quite worked for a parliamentary audience, and as we were launching the event first and foremost in Parliament and putting the sort of sober and fact-based report to MPs, we decided to run the two launches slightly separately, about a month apart, and it helped to invigorate the campaign a bit after the initial success that we'd had doing it that way, and meant that we had better and more ready-to-use creative by the time we started putting out a greater number of social media posts, which were obviously initially based around this particular creative. We also had some very, very welcome celebrity endorsements, but again, in the timescales that were initially available to us, we couldn't have that fully worked out in order to go live at this time, so we decided again to make a virtue of that. Then the general election was called, which necessitated a bit of a further delay, but it meant all our celebrity stuff, which will come onto view a little later, was ready and fit to go a little bit later after the general election, and sort of helped to put the message out and reinvigorate the campaign with new MPs and with the new government team.
And this next slide. It's the reason you're doing it for. This is what you're doing it for, and I suppose these are quite shocking images, and these are on the mini site and everything else. But there is also that balance between like what's good for the public and what's not maybe good for the public, and this campaign.
Yeah, certainly. That's one of the challenges when you're looking at a hard-hitting issue like this. You have to find a balance, have to hit that line between being able to exemplify the issue, because you can't shy away from the fact that animal cruelty is a particularly barbaric and unpleasant crime, and so when we see animals that have been as badly mistreated as some of these have before they come into Battersea, you can't shy away from that. However, at the same time, it's vitally important that any imagery or case studies that you use are non-exploitative, and that they don't shock or upset people excessively, because then you'll just run the risk of putting people off. And we take very seriously the way that Battersea presents itself as an organisation, and so we try and present, where possible, a positive message for change. But obviously, in this particular campaign, we've been required to use some fairly unpleasant images. Happily, some of these were also able to report happy stories as well. And indeed, looking at Ralph, who is the image of our parliamentary launch, who's one of the animals pictured here. If you saw Ralph today, you'd never know he'd ever look like that. He just looks like a happy, much-loved family pet, barring the fact that one of the cuts on his ears is never healed. Other than that, so, there is still some hope that we can offer for some of these cases, which is great. What we felt we had to do with our campaign, and what we have to do with campaigns generally, is provide a combination of both a factual basis and real-world examples of a particular issue. So in this case, we obviously have the real-world examples that you can see on the slide now, but also we had to dig deep to demonstrate to government that it was a fact to support the change that we're looking for.
Okay, and this brings us to the different reports that you had to do, and obviously there's a difference between what's true in the UK, like the rest of the UK, England, Wales, and what's true in Scotland.
Yeah, devolution is one of those things in public affairs that that we're all required to work with. So for this particular campaign, England and Wales have a common legal system, so the law that was brought in, the Animal Welfare Act in 2006, covered England and Wales, hence the reason we did a report jointly into England and Wales. However, the situation in Scotland is very different, so we did a completely separate report for Scotland, which focuses on the fact that Scotland has a different law, has a different maximum sentence, and crucially, the examples we given they are Scottish, with an intention to persuade the Scottish government as opposed to the UK government, which is the case in the England and Wales report.
And I suppose what is, even though it is different, and obviously you have to approach it in a different way, is that the stats behind it for both Scotland and England and Wales is quite shocking compared to other places.
Yeah, and this has been a really, really strong line for the campaign with politicians. Obviously, it's a fairly hot topic at the moment, how as a country we fit around the rest of the world, where we fit particularly within Europe, and people have been genuinely shocked when we started to make the case that England and Wales has the lowest maximum sentence in Europe. This was a fairly lengthy research task for our researcher Barry, who looked at 100 different jurisdictions across the world and couldn't find anywhere with a lower maximum custodial penalty than England and Wales. So this has really shocked both the public and politicians, and it's been a very helpful way of making the argument. We've structured the campaign and we structured the report around when this issue had been discussed before in Parliament and in other places. What were the reasons given for never changing to 5 years before? What were the objections that we expected to face? And so we looked to tackle those head on. And given that in a few short months the government's taken a look at it and made the very welcome decision to endorse our ask for 5 years, we feel we must have made that case reasonably strongly.
And there's just one thing on this graph that I wanted to highlight, is that Northern Ireland is to the very right of it, so it's got strong sentences for this.
Yeah, Northern Ireland, and understanding the situation there, has provided a really critical case study. They reviewed this in 2015 and came to the decision that they needed to move to a 5-year penalty, as was already the case in Ireland. The Northern Ireland governmental staff have been particularly helpful to us in explaining how and why they reached that decision, and that's obviously helped us in our conversations with the governments in Westminster and Edinburgh as well.
And so this is something that is resonating with the politicians, but we also have this, which is the custodial sentences for other offences, and it just shows you, I suppose, in comparison, how animal cruelty is seen against other crimes.
Yeah, this was again a fairly central argument for us, that the government had previously argued that there wasn't a particular need to change it, that they had to reflect proportionality with other offences. We've argued consistently that animal cruelty is disproportionately treated relative to other offences, and we particularly highlighted fly tipping as one of the offences that is punishable considerably more severely than animal cruelty. Which fly tipping, of course, we're not for a minute diminishing the problem of fly tipping that councils have to deal with, but at the same time, that doesn't negate the fact that animal cruelty is treated potentially very leniently. Yes,
and I think it's plain to see there that it's not about making other things come down; it's about making sure everything is proportionate to each other. So if we move on, so the campaign is an award-winning campaign, and I suppose there's so many elements that go into it, but as you mentioned earlier, one of those elements is comedians you're working with. Here we have just one comedian. So how do you go about kind of selecting and bringing on board and working with those comedians for such a high-profile campaign?
It works actually in the same way that working with politicians does, in that relationships are absolutely key. We are fortunate at Battersea that we have a number of wonderful celebrity supporters, not least of whom are celebrity ambassadors, one of whom, Paul O'Grady, was one of the faces of this campaign. We also have a very skilled manager working on relationships with working on relationships with celebrities. So we've been able to go to comedians we know are interested in animal issues, and obviously there's a picture of Ricky Gervais here, who's very well known for his interest in animal issues, and basically say, this is the change we're trying to bring about. Would you be able to help us and lend your support in some way? And we were delighted with the five comedians that came back and said that they would. They've been incredibly helpful to us. And when we were able to use this imagery towards the end of June and push this out across social media in particular, but also we took a lot of billboard advertising space, particularly at sort of transport intersections. You may have seen it if you go into some of the major London stations. That really invigorated the campaign again, just at a time when new MPs and new government team were settling into their new roles after the election.
So do you feel with celebrity endorsement and celebrity collaboration, is it governmental, is it public, is it a bit of both? Because it feels like maybe the reports, the research you've done is so heavy that it's part of what politicians need to see to realise where we are. But for the public to get awareness about this, comedians help a lot with that.
I think for a campaign to be successful, certainly you have to have both political will on the part of government and the public behind you for a change. And I think we've been quite effective at managing to harness both in the course of this campaign. And certainly the endorsement we've had from celebrities, not least because of their own use of social media, that's played a big role, particularly in driving more public support, and that's why over 62,000 people have contacted their MPs in relation to this campaign. Another thing that MPs have fed back to us has been successful, which we did, which seemed like a little logical thing at the time, but it may be that other campaigns haven't done this, is we obviously, like, as is fairly traditional, we have a form, a sort of suggested form of words that people can email to their MP that they're free to tweak as they please on our website. However, when the MP contacts us and says, yes, I support you, and I support you, and I support this campaign, we have a separate form of words for people to send to their MP that basically thanks them for that support. So there's a couple of MPs have contacted us to say that they appreciated that, and this is a lesson learned really from previous campaigning, when on previous campaigns we hadn't done that, and MPs had come back and said, why aren't you recognising the fact that I've already said I support you? So I think if you can show MPs that you're willing to recognise their support for what you're doing, that makes a significant difference.
And we've got an example of MPs that are supporting you and that you're supporting them. I suppose it's kind of this cross collaboration, a nice photo shoot opportunity. But this is MSPs. This is Scotland.
Yeah, the situation in Scotland actually moved very quickly because the government was already discussing this issue, and then shortly after we launched our campaign in Scotland, we were delighted to see the Scottish Government commit to 5-year sentences in their programme for government in September. But what this picture, one of the reasons why I felt it was worth sharing, is it demonstrates not only that for us campaigning is most effective when it works cross-party, and there are MSPs drawn, you will see, from all across the political spectrum in Scotland here. We've also worked with the rest of our sector in supporting this. So there are representatives from a number of different charities across our sector who joined us for this. And actually it worked quite well that one of our other sector partners was holding an event the same week in Holyrood, so it ended up being a very good opportunity for the whole sector really to come together in Edinburgh and have some of these conversations with MSPs that needed to be had. But yeah, we were delighted as this was the first campaign that we've really run off our own steam in Scotland like this. We're delighted with how MSPs have embraced this change.
And the campaign has been, a success in one sense. You've got a lot of coverage, you've got lots of government parliamentarians on board, and here's some of the coverage you've received, and you did win an award. Here's you and the team winning an award. How important is the award, and how much is that like this is successful, or actually there's still work to do?
Yeah, I mean the important bit here obviously is not recognition with an award. The important thing is the fact that the government are now on board with the idea of 5-year sentences, and the fact that the government is looking to put out a consultation on a bill around this between now and Christmas, which is wonderful, and we look forward to seeing that and working with them on that when it arrives. What I do like about this photo is that it does demonstrate rather the importance of cross-departmental working, and that's the way that we have run this campaign. Although the public affairs team has been obviously at the heart of scoping out what we need to do, and we've been the people who have been working with the politicians on this. Looking at this picture, it's a reminder of the weekly project management group, the sort of delivery group, if you like, that we've had, which has representatives from public affairs, but also from our media team, our celebrity manager, our digital team, our creative manager, our fundraising team. We've all been together discussing this and how this fits in with the other priorities of the home, and how we've managed to do this in a way that really brings the organisation as one forward. We think we've been quite effective at doing that, and it's nice to see sort of everybody from drawn across the home together on one picture.
And it is a huge achievement. You know, the PR Week Awards are famously difficult to win. Shortlisted and shortlisted, let alone being shortlisted, that you can also win. But so what's next for the campaign? Because this feels like a highlight of the campaign. It's like that you are recognised, your team is recognised, and everyone in the department and the work you've done is being recognised. But what's next for the campaign?
And the crucial thing is we're only really at half-time here. The UK government is obviously on board with the idea of 5-year sentences, which is wonderful. So is the Scottish government. And what we need now is the implementation of that. We want to work with governments around the UK to see legislation finally passed, and we can see the different constituent nations of the UK move up that league table that we have in our report. So 2018 will certainly be a very busy year of building on the progress that we've made so far.
It's about keeping awareness among all your supporters so far, and making sure that the message still resonates so that government passes change.
Yeah, and this is almost a new challenge for year 2 of the campaign, that we need to recognise that our supporters need to remain engaged and part of this campaign, and we need to work with them. We need to be keeping them updated, and we need to be providing new things for them to talk about and share and discuss.
Excellent. So we've got a little bit of time for a couple of questions, and we have had a couple in. If you had to pick 3 things that won the award for the campaign, what would those things be? And that question is from Lisa.
Thank you very much for your question, Lisa. I think the cross-departmental working was certainly part of it. I think the fact the campaign is presented in a sort of positive and engaging light is certainly another. And crucially, the one thing that matters more than anything else is the fact that we have gone out and secured much of the political support that we need. That is ultimately how any public affairs campaign should be judged. Does it deliver the change that you want it to? And whilst we haven't yet, we're continuing to work on that, and we're confident that will happen.
Thank you. We have another question here from Kelly. It's about social media. So obviously you said that you've used social media throughout this campaign. How important is social media, and how much are you going to be using it on future campaigns, or perhaps differently to how you've used it this time?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, so social media, how important is social media for this campaign, and how would you use it differently in future campaigns? That question is from Kelly.
Again, thank you for your question, Kelly. Social media is absolutely everything in campaigning now. Getting the right messages, and we did a lot of work behind our social media work. So it's not just the posts that people may have seen, and I imagine many of you will have seen not only the Facebook adverts that we took out, but also posts that have been shared across Facebook and Twitter. It's essential to get that sort of messaging right, but what you also need to have is confidence in your responses if people ask you awkward questions on social media, which we have had, and we spent a lot of time thinking before we launched the campaign, what is the one question we wouldn't want to be asked in relation to this particular element of the campaign. So where that involved a few of us sitting around scoping out answers, almost trying to catch each other out really with the kind of questions we could be asked, and then that meant if and when those questions occur, which from time to time they do, you're in a position to answer it.
Brilliant. Well, I've got another question. I'm actually going to put two questions together. We've got a question from Catherine about the budget of the campaign, but we also have a question from Sarah, which is, do you have any tips for charities with perhaps small staff teams or low budgets? So kind of, how do you work with the budget on this one from Catherine, and what tips do you have for people with smaller budgets?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have Battersea is not a small charity, but in terms of the budget for this campaign, outside of advertising, we haven't spent that much. The vast majority of things have been done in-house. So we have a creative team that manage all the online and offline stuff that we do, and they've been integral. They did the photo shoot, so we used, for example, the dog that was photographed with the microphone earlier. That's our own dog and our own microphone. So we've used our own resource as much as we possibly can everywhere we possibly can. In terms of how smaller charities can campaign and make a difference, I think almost the first thing you have to do is identify an issue you know a lot about, and really target it. There's a lot that people can do around social media, around conversations with your own local MP, your own local media, even before you get into national counterparts that can make a sizable difference. And so smaller charities, and we're a member of a group called the Association of Dogs and Cats Homes, which covers 120 different charities or so in our sector. We work with a lot of smaller charities to try and encourage them to speak up and use their own voice. Everybody has one, and charities, in my view, are increasingly the place where expert opinion is found. I certainly know there are some people within my own charity who I cannot imagine it's possible to know more about dogs or cats than they do. So given that charities have a huge amount of knowledge, not being afraid to present that to other people.
Excellent. And I think we've probably got time for just one more question. It might be a bit of a big question or a small question. It's from Laura. It's, what would you have done differently?
Oh, we so nearly made it out the door with that question coming up, didn't we? What would we have differently? This sounds like an obvious thing, but actually, although I said we started planning this a long way out, frankly, I would have liked us to have started it earlier. It's the nature of almost every piece of work you seem to ever do in public affairs, that no matter how much time you allocate for something, you appear to have enough time by about 35 seconds. So perhaps had we started planning certain elements of this earlier, it may have reduced stress levels in the run up to launch day, for instance, and meant that when we had little issues like our room sponsor for the launch was called away on some personal business, and of course when you sponsor a room in Parliament you have to have your room sponsor there. So we had to spend the morning of the campaign frantically trying to find another one, which we managed to do. The little things like that perhaps would have been slightly less stressful or frantic if we'd got some other things done a little earlier.
Excellent. And I suppose the campaign is an award-winning campaign, so it went very well. I suppose even we've got evidence of that, and it's very well deserved. That's all we've got time for. We did have a few more questions. We'll see what we can do about answering those. But thank you very much for joining us this morning, and thank you to Michael, and goodbye.